How's it going, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Take a Wild Guess, the show where I tell you the story of an object, a place, a historical event, or a name, and you guess what I'm talking about. Now, today's episode is called Alcohol is a Solution. It's the story of one of the greatest scientists of the 1800s and his alleged contribution to the world of alcohol. Do you know who I'm talking about? If not, listen on. Maybe you will figure it out by the end of today's story. And even if you don't, you can always take a wild guess. So let's begin. Okay, we humans love stories. It is the way we have communicated just about everything for thousands of years. I will say that telling stories is just as enjoyable as listening to them. And part of the reason why I started this podcast was because I wanted to tell stories to as large an audience as possible. Many times, stories that become super popular are the ones that contain a kernel of truth, which is surrounded by a lot of total BS. This is something that my Hindi friends like to call mirch masala. Now, when just a small group of people indulges in a piece of BS, it is just called gossip. But when a lot of people start doing it, it becomes a myth. One group of people that somehow have been very vulnerable to such myths are scientists. Okay, and we have heard these myths so many times from so many different sources that they've subconsciously become very strongly associated with these scientists. Let's just do an experiment, okay? What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear these names? Isaac Newton, Benjamin Franklin, or Archimedes? There is a good chance that you pictured a guy sitting beneath an apple tree, or a balding guy flying a kite, or a man jumping out of a swimming pool shouting Eureka. Today's story is also about one such myth. Let's dive into it now. Okay, so today's story begins in the extremely cold Russian province of Siberia. And the hero of today's story was the youngest of over a dozen siblings in a very poor family. But despite the poverty that he was raised in, he had a keen interest in academics. In fact, he actually wanted to be a doctor. Now, lucky for him, the state sponsored medical education back then, and there was no entrance exam that was required to get in. So, getting enrolled was the easy part. But soon after, he fainted during an autopsy. It soon became clear to him that he couldn't stand the sights and smells and decided to drop out. He instead got a degree in chemistry, and after that, he worked as a teacher for some time and studied further at the University of Heidelberg for around 2 years. After coming back to Russia, he was offered the position of professor at the University of St. Petersburg, provided that he completed his doctorate. Now, this part is important because his dissertation was titled A Discourse on the Compounds of Water and Alcohol. Now, in this dissertation, the scientist basically studied the physical properties like boiling point and viscosity of mixtures of various concentration of water and alcohol. He also was the first person who managed to isolate anhydrous alcohol, which means 100% pure alcohol, alcohol that does not contain any water in it. Now, the myth that this led to is that he was the one who came up with the ideal alcohol concentration for vodka. The story goes that before our hero, there was no standardization in alcohol concentration in vodka. And he was the one who came up with the optimal golden value of 40% volume by volume alcohol. This myth has been propagated by vodka brands like Russian Standard, and there is even a brand of vodka which is named after this guy. However, nowhere in the dissertation does he actually talk about vodka. Nevertheless, the hero of our story was an extraordinary thinker. Sample this, okay. Apart from his work in chemistry, he was a great economist. About 100 of his many works were related to economics. Back then, when agriculture was the dominant industry in Russia, he created a whole development program which was backed by industrialization. He was the first one to suggest using pipelines for transporting oil and predicted that it will play a huge role in the world economy in the coming years. He prepared various international trade agreements for the Tsarist regime. He helped build Russia's first oil refinery and did various experiments on fertilizers. He had once said that even cavemen can trade in raw materials. If you want to actually prosper, we need to actually set up processing. Now, obviously, these were very significant contributions, but his major contribution is still from the world of chemistry only. Now, when he was a professor at the St. Petersburg University, he wanted to recommend a book on contemporary chemistry to his students. But after some research, he realized that there was no such book available. So he decided to write one himself. It was during this time that he had the idea that if he arranged elements according to their atomic weights, they followed a pattern. Okay, thus was born the first periodic table. By the way, there's another BS story which says that he got this idea in a dream. So unimaginative, the person who discovered benzene is also said to have got the idea in a dream. The story goes something like this: the chemist who discovered benzene was once sleeping, and while he was sleeping, he got a dream in which a snake was biting its own tail, forming a loop. And this gave him the idea that, a benzene would probably be something which follows a ring structure. And that's how he came up with the structure of benzene. Anyway, a certain quizzer slash podcaster is really glad for vodka and is thankful to whoever came up with the 40% ratio. And that brings us to the end of today's story. Do you know who is this chemist that we're talking about? Even if you don't, take a wild guess. Now you must be thinking that I will shortly reveal the answer, right? However, this week we are doing things a little bit differently. The answer to today's story will be revealed in another clip, which I will release on all platforms as well as on Instagram on Sunday. Till then, I invite my listeners to send in their guesses as an email to tawgpodcast@gmail.com or as a message on our Instagram handle. I will reveal the answer in another post. So guess away. You can listen to our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all other major podcast platforms. If you liked this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. If you have any comments, criticisms, or feedback, please write to me at tawgpodcast@gmail.com or message me on our Instagram handle. Till next time, I'm your host Chaitanya Ganu and this is Take a Wild Guess. Thank you.